I said I needed to feel alive again, and he makes me feel trapped. It made him distance himself from me. Hi, Reddit. My name is Nora. I am 30 years old, married to one of the kindest men on earth. His name is Austin, but now things aren't as they used to. There was a time when I felt like the whole world was mine. I used to walk into rooms and feel like the air shifted. I laughed loudly, danced without needing a reason, and said yes to everything that made my heart beat faster. I lived for the weekends, the road trips, the last-minute plans. I had a group of friends who matched my energy. We filled our days with stories and our nights with music. It was never about recklessness. It was about feeling free, feeling like I belonged somewhere beyond routine. In those days, I didn't think much about settling down. Marriage felt far away, something for other people. I wasn't running from it, I just wasn't chasing it. I believed that life would give me time. I believed that as long as I was happy, I was doing fine. Then I met Austin. He was the opposite of everything I was used to. Calm, quiet, thoughtful. He never needed to be the loudest in the room. He didn't chase attention, he listened. I think that's what drew me to him. He gave me a kind of peace I hadn't known before. He made things feel simple when everything else was loud and fast. We met through one of our mutual friends and slowly grew close. The relationship started gently. No sudden sparks or wild passion. It was steady, like water filling a glass. I began to enjoy the stillness of being with him. He didn't need to impress me. He made plans, remembered small things, and made me feel safe. And when we talked about marriage, it felt like the right next step, not a sacrifice. After we got married, I adjusted quickly. I was ready to build a home. I learned to cook better, I stopped staying out late, and I let go of the social life that once felt essential to me. At first, I didn't miss it. I thought this was the new chapter everyone eventually reached. I thought growing up meant letting go of the past and focusing on what mattered. A year later, I had Ellen. I still remember the day she was born, how I held her in my arms and felt something shift inside me. Everything else faded. My body was tired, my mind was foggy, but I felt love in a way I never had before. The early months were hard, but I kept pushing through. I told myself it was all part of motherhood, that I'd adjust, that I just needed time. Austin was supportive in his own quiet way. He helped when I asked. He was there for the hospital visits, the late-night feedings, and the moments when I felt like I was falling apart. But he didn't speak much. He didn't offer comfort with words. He just moved through it like it was a job that needed to be done. I never really questioned that at first. I thought it was enough. Years passed. The chaos of early motherhood turned into routine. Ellen started school. I returned to work. Life settled into a pattern. I would wake up early, prepare breakfast, pack Ellen's lunch, go to work, come home, cook, clean, and make sure everything was in place for the next day. Austin and I barely spoke except about logistics. What Ellen needed, what bills were due, who was picking her up from school. We moved like clockwork, smooth and efficient, but silent. At night, I would lie in bed and stare at the ceiling. I tried to remember the last time I laughed, the last time I felt excited about anything. I missed parts of myself I had forgotten existed. I missed color, music, and noise. I missed the version of me that used to say yes to life. Then I said yes to responsibility, yes to survival. People say this is what marriage becomes. That passion turns into partnership and spontaneity turns into stability. Maybe that's true. Maybe it's what everyone experiences. But for me, it started to feel like something had been taken, not exchanged. I wasn't unhappy. I was just numb. I began to notice things. How Austin sat quietly through dinner, how he would go to bed early, how he never asked how I was feeling. I told myself it wasn't a big deal, that he was tired too, that we were both doing our best. But deep down, I wanted more. I wanted to feel seen again. I wanted to be asked what I needed. I started talking to a few friends again, the ones I used to go out with before I got married. Some of them were still single, still living the lives we once shared. Others were married too, but not all of them had given up who they were before. I began to feel something stir in me, a kind of restlessness. I wasn't jealous. I was just curious about what I had lost. I tried to shake it off, to remind myself of what I had. A husband, a daughter, a home, a job. All the things I once believed would make me whole. But wholeness doesn't always come from having everything. Sometimes it comes from feeling something. And I hadn't felt anything in a long time. I didn't blame Austin. He was doing what he knew. He was showing up in the only way he had learned. But it wasn't enough for me anymore. I wanted more than duty. I wanted a connection. I wanted warmth. I wanted to look at him and see a spark, not a schedule. I didn't say any of this out loud. I kept moving through my days, checking off lists, making dinner, folding laundry. But inside, I was growing distant. Not out of anger, but out of emptiness. The woman I used to be felt like a memory I couldn't reach anymore. Sometimes I would catch a glimpse of her in old photos or when I passed a mirror on a good day. But she always faded. I didn't know what would come next. I just knew I was tired of feeling nothing. There was a quiet sadness I carried for a long time before I ever spoke of it. It started slowly, in the spaces between routines. Waking up, getting Ellen ready for school, preparing meals, going to work, returning home, and starting over again the next day. There was nothing wrong on the surface, but I felt like something essential inside me had shut down. I was functioning, not living. 10 years into our marriage, my life was no longer mine. It belonged to my daughter, to Austin, to the clock, to everyone but me. I used to be the type of person who couldn't stay still. In college, I was the girl who said yes to last-minute road trips, who danced until morning at parties, who talked to strangers like old friends. But somehow I became the woman who wore tired eyes and sensible shoes, who remembered shopping lists more than her own desires. I didn't even notice the loss of myself at first. It crept in, disguised as responsibility and love. I was doing what needed to be done. I told myself that often. But some part of me began to push against it, quietly at first, then more loudly. I wasn't ungrateful. I loved my daughter. I cared deeply about our home, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had disappeared. The people around me began to see it before I admitted it. One of my friends, someone I used to party with years ago, made a passing comment about how I had vanished. She said it jokingly, but I carried it home with me. Another friend, a mother herself, told me it was normal, that we all lose ourselves a bit when we become wives and mothers. But she said something else too, that we don't have to stay lost. Those words stuck. I started looking at myself differently. I began to wonder if I still had a version of me left beneath the layers of motherhood and marriage. I didn't want to break away from my life. I just wanted to feel like I was part of it again. I wanted to feel awake. It began small. One weekend, I told Austin I was meeting my friends for a drink. He nodded. There was no argument, no expression, just silence. I came home before midnight and found him watching TV alone. We didn't talk about it. I started going out more regularly. It wasn't a rebellion. It was a relief. Every outing made me feel like I had a little more air to breathe. My friends welcomed me back easily, as if I'd just taken a long break. With them, I wasn't someone's mother or someone's wife. I was just me. That feeling became something I craved. Austin noticed. I could see it in the way he looked at me, or didn't. He never stopped me. He never asked questions. But the gap between us widened quietly. He'd go to bed before I got home. He stopped waiting up. He stopped asking how my day went. At first, I told myself it was temporary, that I deserved this space, that I would return more refreshed, more alive, and that it would help our marriage. I thought I would bring a better version of myself back home, but it didn't happen that way. The more I stepped out to feel alive, the more detached I became from everything inside the house. I still did what was expected. I cooked, I worked, I picked Ellen from school when I could, but even that started to feel like a script I was tired of repeating. I began to forget little things. Her lunchbox, an appointment, her school art show. Each time, Austin said nothing, but I felt the weight of his silence. He started doing things alone. He took Ellen to the park without asking me. He started feeding her dinner before I got back. Once I walked in and saw the two of them playing on the living room floor. They didn't even notice me at first. When they did, Ellen ran up to me, but Austin simply stood up, gave a short nod, and walked away to the bedroom. That moment stayed with me. There was no fight, no words, just distance. And somehow, that hurt more than shouting ever could. I knew things were shifting. I saw the way he stopped waiting for me emotionally. I felt the coldness that had replaced our comfort, but I also felt like I couldn't stop. I was tasting life again. For the first time in years, I felt like I mattered to myself, that I wasn't just a wife and a mother, but a person. I told myself that he'd adjust, that he'd come around, that once he saw I was happier, he would be happier too. I believed that because I needed to, because the alternative, that my search for myself was pushing him away, was too painful to face yet, but he was already gone in a way, not physically, not yet, but emotionally he had taken a step back, and I could feel it with every late night, every silent dinner, every morning we didn't speak. I was finally feeling alive again. But I didn't realize I was slowly becoming a stranger in my own home. After months of feeling trapped in the endless cycle of daily chores and obligations, I finally decided to make a change. The pressure of being everything for everyone was wearing me down. I longed to find myself again, to breathe without feeling guilty. So I hired a nanny to help with Ellen's care during the day, and sometimes in the evenings. It was a difficult step, one I didn't announce loudly or make a big deal of. I just needed help, and maybe in the back of my mind I hoped for a bit of freedom. At first, the nanny's presence was strange. She moved quietly through our home, taking over tasks I had done for years, preparing Ellen's meals, bathing her, preparing her for school, even playing with her while I retreated to the bedroom or slipped out to meet friends. Watching someone else care for my daughter felt like I was stepping away from my role as a mother, but I told myself it was only temporary. I deserve a break. Slowly, I started spending more time away from the house. What began as short visits with friends grew into long evenings out. I went to parties, dinners, even a few small trips out of town. I felt a rush I hadn't experienced in years, a reminder of who I had once been, the woman who could laugh freely and dance without worrying about bedtime or chores, the woman who existed before the routine stole her away. Austin noticed the change, of course, but he didn't say much. There were no arguments, no angry words, just a growing distance between us. When I came home late, the house was quiet. Sometimes he was asleep. Other times he sat in the living room staring blankly at the television. His eyes didn't follow me anymore, and when they did, I saw a look that was hard to place, disappointment maybe, or sadness. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even resentment. It was something colder, more resigned. I began to realize that Austin was pulling away quietly, without fuss or complaint. The little things that once connected us started to disappear. He stopped sharing his day with me. Our conversations became brief and practical. If Ellen was sick or needed something, he no longer spoke to me first. Instead, he gave money or instructions directly to the nanny. Diapers, baby clothes, toys, anything Ellen required, he handled it through her, bypassing me completely. At first, this hurt more than I wanted to admit. It felt like Austin was pushing me out of his life and the life of our daughter. But at the same time, a part of me welcomed the space. The silent withdrawal matched the distance I had created by stepping back from my duties. I had wanted freedom, and he was giving it to me by stepping aside. Financially, Austin stopped contributing in the ways I expected. He no longer left money for groceries or household expenses. The bills were often left to pile up, and I had to use what little I had saved to cover them. Sometimes the fridge was nearly empty, and the nanny would have to manage with what was available. I never confronted him about it. It felt pointless. The quiet between us was thicker than words. As the days turned into weeks, the house became a strange place to live. With Austin emotionally distant and me physically absent more and more, the warmth we once shared vanished. I was still there, but barely. I was a ghost in the home I had built, drifting through rooms that felt too big and too silent. I remember one evening clearly. I came home just before midnight, the streets dark and empty. The nanny was still there, soothing Ellen, who was finally asleep. Austin was sitting in the living room, eyes closed, head resting against the wall. When he opened his eyes, they flickered toward me, then quickly away. No words were spoken. We shared the same space, but we were miles apart. That night, I realized that what I wanted to feel alive again had cost me more than I expected. The woman I once was, the lively, carefree girl, was slowly slipping away, replaced by someone unrecognizable even to myself. And Austin, the man I had promised to build a life with, was retreating into a cold silence that neither of us seemed able to break. I tried to hold on to small moments, Sometimes I would watch Ellen playing with the nanny, laughing and happy. I felt a mix of relief and guilt. Relief that my daughter was cared for, but guilt that I wasn't the one providing it anymore. I told myself this was temporary, that soon I would find balance again. But Austin's absence grew. His touch, once warm and comforting, disappeared. Our nights were spent in separate rooms. Our conversations, when they happened, were about bills, appointments, or Ellen's needs. The deeper things, hopes, the dreams, the fears we no longer shared. Austin had quietly been planning what I wasn't ready for. I wasn't sure when he had planned to tell me, or if he even would. Shortly after, Austin took Ellen and left the house. The nanny stayed with me, but the emptiness was overwhelming. The house we had filled with laughter and memories was now just a building with walls that held our silence. I learned that he had put the house up for rent, without telling me. The life we built was now being handed over to strangers, like a chapter that was closing. I was left to pick up the pieces, wondering how we had reached this point without a single fight, without a single moment of real conversation. I felt trapped again, but this time, it was different. I wasn't trapped by routine or expectations. I was trapped by the consequences of my own choices. The freedom I had sought came with a price, loneliness, loss, and the collapse of what I thought was my family. Looking back, I don't know if either of us really wanted this to happen. Maybe we were both afraid to confront the truth. Maybe we hoped it would fix itself. But silence can be louder than words, and in our quiet, the distance between us became a chasm. Austin's quiet patience had limits I hadn't fully understood until the moment he finally crossed the line. For months he endured my absence, my late nights, the parties, and the way I stopped being the mother and wife he once loved. He never yelled or accused me, but his silence was heavy, filled with disappointment and hurt. When I hired the nanny, I thought it would ease the pressure on both of us. Instead, it became a symbol of how far I had stepped away from my family, and how deeply Austin was sinking into his own world of quiet pain. I stopped waking early to prepare Ellen's breakfast or help her get ready for school. The small, everyday things that once seemed mundane now felt like distant memories. I no longer read bedtime stories or asked Ellen about her day. Those moments that had once been the foundation of our family disappeared, replaced by my restless need to feel alive beyond the walls of our home. I thought I was finding myself again, but Austin saw it as me abandoning the life we built together. One evening, after another night out, I returned back home early in the morning. I returned home to an empty house. The nanny was gone too. Austin had stopped by and packed the last piece of his things and Ellen without telling me, without leaving a message. I called Austin again and again, but my calls went unanswered. I sent messages that were ignored. The house that once filled with our daughter's laughter and Austin's quiet presence was now cold and empty. I wandered from room to room, searching for signs that they might return, grasping for hope in the silence. Through a mutual friend, I learned that Austin had paid off the nanny and told her not to come back. He wasn't just taking Ellen away. He was reclaiming the family life I had let slip through my fingers. It was his way of protecting our daughter, making sure she was safe from the chaos I had brought into our home. I felt a sharp sting of guilt, but also a growing sense of helplessness. The weeks dragged on with no word from Austin or Ellen. The silence was suffocating. Nights became the hardest, lying awake in a bed that suddenly felt hot and cold at the same time. The loneliness was taking a toll on me. I thought I needed to feel alive, but all I found was emptiness. I began to see the cost of my choices. I had taken for granted the steady routine, the quiet moments of motherhood, the stability of family life. In chasing excitement, I had pushed away what truly mattered. Then, without warning, the divorce papers arrived, delivered to the empty house Austin was already preparing to rent out. The documents were cold, final. Reading them felt like a blow to the chest. Austin was not just leaving, he was ending us completely. The home where Ellen had taken her first steps, where birthdays were celebrated and memories made, was now being handed over to strangers. It was like watching the last page of our story being torn out. The divorce papers forced me to confront everything I had ignored. How did our marriage come to this? How had my need for freedom and excitement turned into a prison for us both? I realized too late that in trying to feel alive again, I had trapped us in separate worlds. Austin had retreated into silence and coldness, and I had lost myself chasing a feeling that was never really there. After serving the papers, Austin's final act was to put our house up for rent. It was a quiet but powerful statement. He was done holding on to the past, done waiting for a version of me that no longer existed. The house was no longer our home. It was a place for strangers to live, a symbol of a life broken beyond repair. I was left to pick up the pieces. The silence of the empty rooms echoed the emptiness inside me. I had lost my husband, my daughter's presence in my daily life, and the life I thought I would have forever. The consequences of my choices settled around me like dust. Looking back, I saw the moments I could have changed, when I could have talked to Austin instead of avoiding him, when I could have chosen to stay instead of running away. But hindsight offered no comfort. The damage was done, and I was forced to live with the results. The hardest part was realizing that feeling alive again came at a price. My freedom and excitement had come at the cost of my family. Austin's departure wasn't just about anger or punishment. It was about survival. He had to protect Ellen and himself from a life unraveling around them. Days turned into weeks, and I remained in the empty house waiting for a sign, a call, anything to tell me they were coming back. But Austin was firm in his decision. The divorce papers were just the beginning of the end. I started to understand the depth of what I had lost. Not just a husband or a home, but the family I had taken for granted. The late nights and parties, the need to feel alive, none of it mattered without them. Austin's silence was the loudest thing in the house. It spoke of disappointment, hurt, and the finality of a love that had faded. I was alone now, facing a future I hadn't planned for. The house, once full of life and hope, now stood quiet and empty, waiting for strangers to make it theirs, and I was left to find a way to live with the emptiness I had created. After Austin served me the divorce papers and put our house up for rent, I thought that was the end of it, that he would simply walk away and let me figure out the ruins of my life. But I was wrong. The quiet way he had left before was only the beginning of what I would come to understand as his revenge. It wasn't loud or aggressive. It was calm, cold, and carefully calculated. It felt like he was slowly shutting the door on me, piece by piece, until I was completely cut off from everything we had shared. The first sign came when I realized my access to our joint finances was suddenly restricted. The bank accounts I once shared with him were now frozen or transferred solely to his name. The money we had saved for emergencies, vacations, and our daughter's education was now out of reach. I was left to rely on what little I had managed to keep in my own name, but it was nowhere near enough to support myself and keep up with the bills. The sudden loss of financial control hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't just about money. It was a clear message. Austin wanted me to understand that my actions had consequences, and he wasn't going to make it easy for me. Austin had always been quiet in his way of showing anger or disappointment. He never yelled or argued, but now I saw his anger in the empty rooms of our house and the locked bank accounts. He made it clear that he would not make things easy for me. The financial strain was immediate and crushing. I struggled to pay the nanny who was no longer there, the bills that kept piling up, and the everyday expenses of life. Without Austin's support, the burden of responsibility landed squarely on my shoulders. More painful than the money was the custody battle that followed. Austin had taken full legal custody of our daughter. He did not just take her away the night he left, he made sure it was official and permanent. I was allowed only limited visits, supervised and strictly controlled. At first I thought I could fight for more time with my daughter, but Austin was determined to keep Ellen close, to shield her from the chaos I had brought into our lives. Every visit was a reminder of what I had lost. Seeing Ellen through a glass window or meeting her briefly at a neutral place felt like a punishment I could barely bear. I remember the day I first saw Ellen after the divorce papers were signed. She looked smaller, quieter, like a child who had been holding too many feelings inside. Austin had done a good job protecting her from the worst of it, but the distance between us was undeniable. The daughter I had once held every day was now someone I could only visit briefly, under watchful eyes, like a stranger in her life. That moment struck me with a force I didn't expect. It wasn't just the loss of custody, it was the slow death of the mother-daughter bond I had taken for granted. Austin's coldness extended beyond money and custody. Calls went unanswered. Messages were left unread. When I tried to speak to him about any of it, the silence was the only response. It was like he had built a wall between us, strong and unyielding. His silence was louder than any argument, more painful than any shouting match. It spoke of deep disappointment and a refusal to be drawn back into the life I had shattered. In those moments, I felt completely isolated. The life I had once known was gone, replaced by loneliness and regret. I thought feeling alive meant freedom and excitement, but now I was trapped in a prison of my own making. Austin's revenge was not about punishment, but about protecting himself and Ellen from further pain. And in doing so, he left me to face the consequences alone. There was no dramatic confrontation or explosive fight. The divorce was quiet, legal, and final. Austin moved on with his life while I was left picking up the pieces. I knew deep down that this was the end of our marriage, the final break. But what hurt most was realizing how far we had fallen from the people we used to be. Sometimes I wondered if Austin regretted his decisions, if he missed the life we had before, but his silence told me otherwise. He was resolute, and perhaps relieved to close that chapter. For him, it was survival, moving away from the pain I had brought into our home. I tried to understand his actions, the coldness, the distance. I knew I had given him reasons to withdraw, but I never imagined how final it would be. Austin's revenge was not violent or loud. It was a quiet cutting off of ties and trust, one that left deep scars and an emptiness I struggled to fill. The house we once shared was rented out to strangers. Walking through its empty halls was a reminder that nothing was left for me there. It was not just a house anymore. It was a symbol of the life I had lost. A home turned into a place where I no longer belonged. Every corner held memories, some painful, some precious, but now they belonged to someone else. The walls were silent, and so was I. As the days passed, I began to rebuild my life in small, uncertain steps. Without Austin or Ellen at my side, I had to learn how to live alone. The freedom I had once craved now felt hollow. I longed for the stability and love I had taken for granted. The nights I had spent chasing excitement were replaced with quiet loneliness. I understood finally that the life I had wanted was not about escaping, but about connection. Austin's revenge was complete. He had taken everything he could, not out of spite, but to protect what mattered most to him. I was left to face the consequences and find my own way forward. Looking back, I understood that feeling alive was not about parties or late nights. It was about connection, responsibility, and love, the very things I had abandoned. Austin's silence taught me that lesson in the hardest way possible. I was alone now, but perhaps that was the only way I could finally see who I really was, and maybe someday find a way to live again, not as the woman I was before, but as someone new, shaped by loss and learning. Update. Hello, Redditors. After everything that happened between Austin and me, life became a slow, steady process of trying to heal and figure out what came next. The divorce was final, and the house was rented out. Austin and Ellen had moved on to their own life without me, and I was left to rebuild from the ground up. It wasn't easy, and some days I still felt the weight of all I had lost. But in those years since, I learned a lot about myself, things I had never truly faced before. The first few months alone were the hardest. The quiet in my apartment felt heavier than I expected. The space around me reminded me constantly of what I didn't have. No Austin coming home after work, no Ellen calling out from the other room, no laughter or even the small noises that had once made a house a home. I felt empty, and I wasn't sure how to fill the silence. I stayed busy at first, working long hours, trying to distract myself, but distractions only took me so far. The loneliness would creep in the moment I was alone with my thoughts. I realized I had to face the emptiness rather than run from it. I started journaling, writing down what I was feeling without judgment. It was uncomfortable but honest. I wrote about my regrets, my mistakes, and the things I wished I could take back. Writing helped me see things clearer, not just the pain, but also the lessons. One of the hardest truths I faced was accepting that my choices had consequences, and some of those consequences were irreversible. I had wanted to feel alive, to break free from routine and boredom, but in chasing that, I lost my family and the life I once had. The freedom I had imagined didn't come without a price. I felt the sting of that every day. But slowly, I also started to forgive myself. Forgiveness didn't come overnight, and it wasn't easy, but it was necessary for me to move forward. Over time, I began to rebuild my life piece by piece. I found a new apartment, smaller and quieter, but it was my own space. I started setting small goals, things like cooking a meal, reconnecting with old friends, and trying new hobbies. I joined a book club and started taking walks in the park nearby. These small steps gave me a sense of normalcy and helped me remember what it felt like to enjoy simple things again. Reconnecting with friends was difficult at first. Some of them had drifted away when the divorce happened, unsure how to handle the changes, but a few stayed close. They didn't judge me or push me to be someone I wasn't. They just listened when I needed to talk and gave me space when I didn't. I realized how important real support was, not the kind that comes with advice or judgment, but the kind that simply shows up. I also worked on healing my relationship with Ellen. Austin's choice to take full custody and limit my visits was painful, but I respected that he was trying to protect her from the chaos. Over time, through supervised visits, calls, and messages, I found ways to stay connected. It wasn't the easy, everyday mother-daughter bond I once had, but it was a start. Ellen was growing up, and I watched her change from a distance. She was shy at first, unsure about her mom who had been absent for so long. But slowly, she began to open up. I treasured every smile, every small conversation, every time she called me mom. I knew I had to be patient, understanding that healing takes time for everyone involved. It wasn't about me anymore. It was about rebuilding trust with her on her terms. Austin and I never fully reconciled, but over time our conversations became less strained. We weren't friends, but we found a way to communicate when it was necessary, especially for our daughter's sake. That wasn't easy, and it took a lot of effort from both of us to keep things civil. We agreed to keep our personal feelings separate and focus on co-parenting. It wasn't perfect, but it was something I was grateful for. I also found a new purpose in helping others. I started volunteering at a local community center, working with women who were going through difficult times, divorce, loss, or just struggling to find themselves. Hearing their stories reminded me that I wasn't alone in my struggles. It gave me a chance to share what I'd learned, and in doing so, I felt a new sense of meaning. Looking back, I regret everything. The life I had with Austin and Ellen was beautiful in many ways, but it wasn't the whole story. My mistakes were real, and the pain was deep, but so was the growth that came after. I became more honest with myself, and learn to value the quieter, steadier moments of life. I'm learning to be gentle with myself, to accept that healing is a journey without a clear endpoint. Ellen is growing into a kind, thoughtful young girl, and I'm proud of the relationship we are rebuilding. Austin has his own path, and while we no longer share a life together, I respect the man he is trying to be for our daughter. We all carry our scars, but we also carry hope. In the end, feeling alive again was never about escaping. It was about facing the truth, accepting the past, and choosing to move forward with courage. It's not a perfect story, but it's mine.